Hello, and welcome to another episode of I Just Want to Be Included. My name is Veronica Olson, and today I continue talking with Lisa about my parenting journey with a non-binary child. There are so many stories to share and things to talk about with this issue. We are just scratching the surface. Talking about gender identity issues is difficult. You may not like or agree with everything you hear on this podcast, and that is okay. The goal of this podcast is to bring humanity to difficult topics. People working through their gender identity are human beings with thoughts and feelings. They have friends and family who love them and are trying to find ways to support them. There is no place for hate, making others' lives difficult, or dehumanizing people. As always, anything said in this podcast is based on personal thoughts, opinions, and experiences. Nothing said in this podcast should be taken as professional advice. Every person is different. Every situation is different. Please always look in your community for professional help with whatever issues you or your child might be facing. Enjoy the episode.
Okay, continuing on with our topic of the child that told you that they were non-binary and all the other stuff that you said that I forgot. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Veronica, was there any risk of self-harm with this child, or did you feel like what kind of care did you give them? You know, we talked a little bit about getting them therapy. Did you find a good therapist to?
Yeah, so this child has dealt with anxiety for a very long time,
Okay.
and I was aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they started, especially talking about legal name change, all these things, and I knew I wasn't over my head. Like I just knew these were not things that I was going to be able to deal with on my own.
Right.
I decided, and I talked to them like, would you be willing to do therapy? And this is not therapy like to change you. This is not conversion therapy, but
Right.
I need you to talk to somebody while you're thinking through these changes so that you understand what these changes are going to do, what they're not going to do. I don't want you to feel like you can have surgery and all of a sudden your life's going to be wonderful and you're going to be a happy person, because
Right.
that's not how life goes. So fortunately at the time I was working for a medical billing company and we had a lot of mental health professionals.
Perfect.
So I made a professional call and I said, I need help. I need, just someone who I had a good rapport with, and told her what was going on. And so she got me in touch with a therapist who specifically deals with the LGBTQ community.
Okay.
And gender identity issues. And so that was wonderful because I found somebody that was going to meet this kid where they were at, not try to talk them out or in anything, talk them into anything or out of anything, but just, hear them out with what they're thinking and feeling, and then talk to them about the realities of when you make physical changes or legal changes,
Right.
and what that means and what it doesn't mean. Those were my concerns. And so we were very fortunate to find somebody local that could talk them through those things.
Did you also try to find any care, any mental health care for you and your family, your spouse?
I did not.
Okay.
And people have asked me that before, well, what about you? Well, I was a typical mom, and at the same time that this kid was going through things, our older daughter, who has a long history of depression and anxiety, was having a pretty bad mental breakdown, trying to deal with virtual college and working in a nursing home during COVID.
Wow.
And she was really struggling. And I was fielding a lot of phone calls for her and doing wellness checks on her. And so I was just trying to keep all this plate spinning.
Right. Right. So you had a lot on your plate.
Yeah. And
as
luckily, I had one good friend that we would go out in the woods and we'd walk and we'd talk. And so that
Good.
was, I had someone to talk to,
Hmm.
and I could say whatever I was thinking, feeling. And she was really good about, listening, but also asking questions. And so I had that. But my main concern wasn't me, of course. It was, I've got this kid struggling, and that kid struggling.
Right.
I had 3 in my house that had a history of depression and anxiety. And so it was all about, well, how can I give them the help they need? Because
Right.
my main concern was them.
Right. Well, you mentioned earlier in the program, and I thought it was a very interesting way to look at this, that you said you were grieving with
Mhm.
this. And we reserve the word grief, I think it's becoming different, it's changing, but we reserve the word grief for when people die.
Yeah.
And I think you and I are proving to people that a person doesn't have to die for you to be able to grieve them.
Right.
In fact, they can still be living in your house.
Yeah.
And again, it's called ambiguous grief. I've researched the term just a little bit, but not enough to know anything about it, except for the fact that it's this kind of grief that we are experiencing with our kids,
Yeah.
where they're not here, but they're not dead. They're not what they used to be, but they are different. So the idea is, how do you go on with that, and what do you do to make your family the cohesive unit that it used to be, even
Yeah.
though things are different and it really isn't the same unit at all.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of have to fight for it, and it put us in a place where we had to have just some uncomfortable conversations, and as a family, I had to verbally say, while we're all eating dinner, like, I want all of you to understand
Mhm.
you are all always welcome here. Whoever you bring home with you is welcome here. I'm not as hung up about what gender somebody is, what ethnicity, whatever.
Right.
I want you to find somebody that's kind and respectful, but I need you to understand that we are always here to support you. There's nothing going on behind anyone's back, anyone talking about anybody. We're all struggling with different things. We're all going to support each other.
Right.
But day in and day out, that's not always easy, right?
Sure.
Because when you have siblings, they're siblings, and we're all human beings, and everyone's got their own struggles and their own thoughts and opinions. And so even if you don't agree with a decision your siblings making, I still expect you to be respectful and
Right.
to love them and support them. And it's not an automatic thing all the time.
Did you feel like you and your husband were a united front on this? And did you have conversations privately before you talked to the children? And not that they're children, I mean, your kids are all grown, almost adults, but
Right.
We're using that word just because that's what they are. They're your kids. They're always going to be your kids.
Yeah.
Do you think that you both talked about this together, or did you feel like you had to take more of a lead role in guiding the family through all this?
I definitely took a lead role.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess I would have to ask my husband from his perspective.
Right.
Was it a united front? We presented a united front.
Sure.
As a family. We didn't argue behind the scenes necessarily, but I think we processed differently. And I had friends to go talk to and people to talk through this with and process it.
Right.
And he just didn't have that. So, it's not even fair to say, well, you weren't, there in the same way, or, we weren't equal in this, because we just had different resources, so we were united, but I definitely took a lead, and handled the day-to-day stuff. But that's what I was used to doing for all these kids.
Right.
And so they would come to me with all that stuff. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah. Just you've talked to me personally before about having a village. And when you went through your situation with this child that we're talking about today, and when I went through my estrangement with my child, we were in different situations because you had a house full of 6 people,
Yeah.
and I lived by myself.
Yeah.
But I think we both relied on community and the village that we both had established for ourselves. I had to establish that village almost after my daughter left my household
Yeah.
because she left at 12, and I didn't really have a community that I had established besides my church.
Right.
And I found a local winery that, I had my church family and my winery family.
Yeah.
So, you find community where it is. And sometimes it's in a place that most people at church would go, oh my goodness, you shouldn't walk into that place. I didn't even feel comfortable telling some people in my church for a while that I went to a winery.
Yeah. And see the church aspect of this.
Right.
Is a whole topic in itself because it's COVID.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't going to church anywhere.
So you could kind of mask the situation in your house for a little while.
We lived in a bubble.
Right. Because we all lived in bubbles.
We all lived in a bubble. But even when church doors opened back up, we did not rush back. And part of that is because we were struggling with, where our faith was at and where we felt like we needed to be. There are multiple issues going on, in addition to what was going on with our kids. Right. And so we just had the luxury of we're just going to stay home. And, me and my husband did online church and definitely fed ourselves. And personally, I had more spiritual growth during COVID than I'd probably had in most of my life up to that point.
And that's an interesting topic in and of itself.
Yes. But that community and, church is a community, but at the same time with a topic like this, I can have a directory with all these names and phone numbers. Who am I going to call?
Right.
Who's going to understand this? Who can I trust to keep this information quiet and not start talking to other people? Who can I trust to, still treat my kid with respect, even if they don't agree with the decisions they're making? Those were all very real to me, as someone who grew up in church. And so my first instinct was not to tell anybody from church. And to be quite honest, those people from church were more at the tail end of who I told.
Right.
Because it was just riskier, and once I've done it, I haven't had any issues. Everyone's been very supportive and loving of me and my family, but that initial fear was there.
Sure.
It was very real. And so community, church was a community, but it wasn't, not in the way I needed it to be at that point.
And personally for you too, how did this news from your child affect your faith, your relationship with God personally?
It brought me to my knees really quickly.
Yeah.
Because I knew I did not know how to deal with this.
Right.
I had no clue. And so it brought me to a place of just continually praying and saying, I don't know what to do here. God, I need you to tell me what to do. Right. I want to know what the right thing to do is. I need to know what the wrong thing to do is. I don't want to misstep here. What is the right thing to say? What words do not need to come out of my mouth, even if I'm thinking.
Right.
Because the stakes felt very high. When you've got kids who are dealing with depression and anxiety and then gender identity issues, that puts them in a high-risk category for a lot of mental health issues and self-harm. And so I really, it put my faith in a place of just daily, okay, God, what are we doing? Because I've got nothing here. I have nothing.
Yeah.
And I've stayed in that state for a few years because it was one kid.
I'm still trying to get out of that state myself.
And it was another kid. Right. So.
Yeah, with me, with my case, my situation, I thought of Gideon. I thought, God, you've got the wrong girl. I can't handle this.
Yeah.
And of course, we've got that scripture in the Bible that says, God will not give you more than you can handle. But
Right.
everyone forgets about Philippians 4:13 that says, I can do all things through Christ who
Yeah.
strengthens me. So God is not going to give us more than we can handle, but he expects us to lift him up.
Yeah.
You know, to put his umbrella, to put Christ over the situation and say, you're in control. And that's really hard to do because we have a situation, we have a society. We just talked about the Barbie movie. Women are supposed to be empowered.
Yeah.
People want to be empowered. We want to do everything on our own. So, you know, what happened next for you guys? Where did you go from there?
So, you know, at this point, the child starts talking, wanting a legal name change was definitely an issue. And in the state we're in, at 18, you don't need parent permission.
Okay.
You know, if you're under 18, then you need both parents for permission. And that's something I struggled with because they were pushing, can we just do a legal name change? Can we just do a legal name change? And, I kept saying, this is a really big deal. And I didn't feel like they appreciated what a big deal this was.
Right.
And so I kind of put them off. Partly, I want you to do therapy. I want you to understand, the decisions you're making, how that's going to play out. And also, they were in a situation where their preferred name was being used a lot in daily life. Like at home, we were using the preferred name.
Okay.
At school, they went to a school where teachers had no problem changing names and pronouns. When they would go to the doctor or the dentist or any of those kinds of places, they started asking to be called something different. So in daily life,
Okay.
the preferred name was starting to be used. And so I thought, well, short term, this kid was like 17. Like, short term, you have the preferred name being used.
Right.
So is it really that big of a deal to wait till you're 18? Is kind of how I looked at it. And so I did have them wait till they're 18 just to kind of buy time. And just so they really understood this is what they really wanted to do, was my concern. And luckily they were close enough to 18 where I could put them off and it was not, that, it was maybe a year that I put them off realistically. If they had been younger, if they'd been 12 or 13, I don't know how I would have dealt with that, if I would have been different or not. But that's the cards I had. And so I played my hand and, it worked out.
Well, I think that was smart to get them counseling, to get them therapy, and to have them wait a little longer because, I mean, the name change is a big deal, but of course we're in another program. We might talk about the surgeries and things like that they have to really think about, contemplate, because we're not talking about easy surgeries here.
Right.
We're talking about major reconstructive surgery to the body, which of course can be very painful, very, time
consuming
to get over,
and scarring. Right. There's a whole slew of issues that go along with that. So realistically, the legal name change was the easiest thing to deal with.
Right.
Although it was not easy.
Sure.
Because that's a whole process.
There's an emotional process for you.
Emotional, but even physical, right? There was a whole process to go through that. And, I helped even though my kid was 18, didn't want my permission, I helped them go through the process because they have a lot of anxiety. So just walking out of the courthouse asking questions was not going to happen, or just picking up the phone and finding out something was not going to happen. And so I walked with them every step of the way through that process.
Did this change your relationship with that child?
That is a good question. I would like to think so, in that we've had to talk about really hard things. And hopefully, um, you know, this child, I'm pretty sure, knows that I'm a safe person. You know,
Right.
they
That's
can say
important.
anything to, they can get mad at. I'm a punching bag a lot of times, because they can take things out on me and they know it's going to be okay. I'm still going to love them at the end of the day. So I think it's helped us grow.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, it's so complicated because they're still 19. Right? And, I'm
Yeah.
still a parent. And um, they still don't think I always know what I'm talking about. And I don't,
Right.
and I've learned to say that to my kids. I don't know, and they don't always like to hear that. But, like, guess what? I don't. You guys
Right.
have pushed me to a point where there's a whole lot of things I don't know.
Right.
So I am freely admitting that.
It's very big of you.
I don't know if it's big of me, but it's just kind of the point I've gotten to.
Right. Right. Well, I think that we've had a very interesting conversation. I don't know if you want to add anything else, but I think it's been very great talking to you about this story. I love hearing what you've had to say. Believe I've asked all the questions that I had, and you've answered
Yeah.
them very well.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, and this topic will come up again, but
sure.
with the non-binary issue, as a parent, um, it's complicated, and people don't really seem to understand that.
Yeah.
They think it's black and white. It's, well, God made man and woman, pure the end. But when you've got a kid in your house that's has struggled for a
Right.
lot of their life, that is struggling, it's really hard to just ignore that. I can't ignore that as a parent. I have to deal with them
Right.
how they are here and now,
Right.
and deal with it on that front. And deal with it not knowing what's going to happen 5 years down the road. I just don't.
Right. And I think conservative people, I have friends that are in the church that are conservative and friends that are out of the church that are conservative that I have mentioned this to um, over where I live.
Yeah.
And they have said, just tell the kid to snap out of it. Well, you can't tell a kid to snap out of something that they are.
Yeah.
And that's the struggle that we have with the church, I think, and with faith. We want to bring some light to we want to bring some light to the subject. We do not want to bring any judgment. We're not trying to cause any rifts, but I guess in a way we probably are trying to bring some understanding, and that may cause a change, but that would be a great change to have.
Yeah. And to understand, it's been really the last few years, I've done a lot more listening than talking with my kids, all of them, because they've all been through a lot of changes,
Right.
and made choices that I don't necessarily understand or always agree with, but I've learned to listen and see things from their point of view. And so I don't have to agree with it. No one's going to agree with all the decisions their kids make.
Right.
That's just, the nature of being human and being a parent. But I do try to listen and understand and hear where they're coming from. I think that's important, that kids know that they're being heard,
Right.
and if you grow them up in a house where they're not being heard or seen, what does that do to them? That's not going to convince them to go walk back in a church building.
Right.
That just convinces them, I'm not who you want me to be. I'm not good enough, so I'm walking away.
Well, and they just want to be included, right?
They just want to be included. They just want to be loved. And
right.
That was one of the biggest things with having kids that have come out. Two of my kids are part of the LGBTQ community. The fear of rejection is huge, and it's with everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's with parents, it's with the grandparents, it's with the people you grew up with at church, it's with the people at school, it's with everybody.
Right.
You know, when they make a decision to come out and to go out into the world and dress differently and be called a different name, it's risky.
It is.
It's
Well,
very risky for them to do that.
and we all make changes and decisions in our lives every day that are risky, like you said. And we all just want to be heard. And I think that as parents, we have to make decisions to show our children that we're hearing them.
Yeah. And so it's been that. It's also been, in addition to that, it's talking to my friends and their parents and finding out we're all dealing with really hard stuff.
Mhm.
And I grew up in this church environment where you kind of left anything unpleasant outside of the church door. And
Right.
you walked with a smile on your face because everything's fine. It is fine.
I am fine.
We're
You're fine.
It's all good. Right?
Nothing to see here.
Yeah. And I understand it because you don't know what people are going to say, where judgment's going to come from, you know, what people are going to gossip about. So I get it, but I'm also done with that.
Right.
You know, that's not the kind of community I think Jesus had intended for
No.
a church to be. It wasn't a place for appearances and everybody's got it all together.
Mhm.
Because no one's got it all together,
Mm-mm.
no matter what they look like, you know, sitting in a pew. So I have been very vocal with my village and my friends about what I've dealt with. And what I've noticed is it's helped other people talk about things.
Right.
And that's also true in church. The church I'm going to now, I have been very vocal about having kids with these struggles.
Right.
And I have found other parents who have struggled with the same thing in their house. They didn't know if it was safe to talk about. Or I've had other people say, you know, I appreciate you talking about this because it's helping me see people differently. You know, it's bringing some humanity to these issues. It's easy to have very strong feelings about transgender, LGBTQ, a lot of these issues. It's easy. Oh, that's wrong.
Right.
It's easy to
Right.
say that until it's your kid or it's your friend's kids or it's your niece or, you know, it's somebody you know and love and care about. And you have to stop and be okay.
Right.
Even if I don't agree with this, I still love this person and I still have a relationship with them and I still want to get them in my life. So we've got to rethink this, you know, and how this looks, what this is. So, you know, I've been very convicted and just, I was talking about it to people and I'm very honest. I don't have all the answers.
Right.
I do not, you know, and I don't know what I'm doing all the time, you know, for sure. But this is what's going on in my house.
Right.
And this is how God has helped me get through it. And I love my kids. I know God loves my kids. That's my starting place.
That is a great place to start and probably a great place to end.
It is a good place to end. I agree with you. Yeah. More we will talk about, but yeah.
We've got lots more to talk about.
But that was definitely a good place to end. Thank you for taking the time to interview me today.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you so much for joining me today, and a big thank you to Lisa for taking the interviewer role and helping me share my story. Next week, we will be talking about the Barbie movie. This will be a fun and lighter episode. Hang in there, take care of yourself. We are all doing the best we can. See you next week.